right? Classroom environments matter. There's so many sessions that are good to attend on the app. But you can get in the QR code. One is for Canva and one is just the regular Google Doc. So you can go ahead and do that. I know that's one of those things that people ask about, like, where do we get the slides? When do we get the slides? You get them now. Are we good? Are we good? Nope, okay.
My 11 hours.
Oh, no, we don't have the slides up right now. Yeah, so there you go.
I emailed it for Helen. Sorry.
Jennifer over there. I do not answer to Jennifer. I answer to Jen. And Clark County Office of Education. And this is.
I'm Ann Post Proctor. I'm also from the Santa Clara County Office of Education. I am an occupational therapist and the swallowing and feeding specialist, and I've also completed the sensory integration and praxis program from USC-WPS.
Okay, and please take note of our emails because I know this is not gonna be like a very comprehensive, it's kind of like skimming through the, like what's sensory in the classroom. So take note of our emails. I know you have the digital version of our slides, so we're gonna move forward. Okay, those are the stress balls that I have used with my students. I just wanna do a little check-in, quick check-in. Which stress ball are you? Share with your partner if you want to. Yeah, that would be better, because I think we're not expecting like a room full of people. So share out, do a little share out with your partner. Which stress ball are you?
Sleepy. Or sleepy.
Maybe the shades.
And you can even share why, right? So just a little bit of background, I chose this. I use this as an icebreaker for a birthday party for my kid, my own kid. We had this as their favors, but I wanted them to kind of like, get to know everybody in the group because they belong to different groups of kids, soccer, school, church. So they had to pass the stress ball that, that describes their feeling to another kid. So you could use that in the classroom too. Like, this is on Amazon. You could get it from Amazon. It's one of the cheapest. Okay, so we now go to the meat of things. Hopefully by the end of our session, we will know the difference between under-reactive and over-reactive students and how to address their needs. We discover what sensory strategies work and do not work in the classroom. I'm going to repeat that. In the classroom. We're not going to be discussing anything on clinical sensory integration because that's not what we're doing for, right?
Right.
Okay, and then we're hoping that you will learn to apply accommodations and environmental modifications to create sensory friendly and safe classrooms. Okay. Hybrid is tough. We got to create some, items that are hybrid, our online viewers, right, to kind of like participate in. So now you're gonna have to scan the QR code yourself. So we see our feedback. It's a question. What comes to mind when you hear the word sensory? Well, we can scan the QR code. So while everybody has the finished scanning. Did it go? Uh-oh. Hold on. 5, Oh, it's working. So we see 5 senses, visions. There we go. Yes. Stimulation, senses, calming. Mhm. So as you can see, it's evolving, it's changing, right? So many people are adding. So, is it? No, I mean, this is, so as you can see, most of, oh, don't move it. Okay, so senses is right in the middle, right? Some of you wrote 5 senses, some of you wrote senses. But we like that there's like safe, focusing, interactive, fidget. Why do you think this is important? Like when you're in a classroom and you are talked to or asked, like, what are you doing about my kids' sensory needs? Or what is in place, right? When my student or my kid goes to your class and there's a sensory need. If you're looking at how we are associating the word sensory with like certain things, right? Like fidgets, bodily experience, self-regulation, touching, overload, stimulation. Are we able to kind of like have that big picture of what's going on with our students in a classroom when we have a certain word associated with the word sensory? How many of us here are having to deal with the word sensory because it's a need in the classroom? A good number of us, right? So this is just a part of like framing, because you walk into a classroom, it looks okay, but then you have a student who has a specific need, and it's sensory. And sensory could mean a lot of things, right? So now we go to another reflective component of our presentation. Well, you have the printed form on the table. If you have it. So it's called a sensory motor preference checklist. So this is for adults. It's not like the sensory form that your occupational therapist provides when they have an assessment. But I would like you to take a look at this. It's a reflective component. I want you to take a look at the items that's on here, right? And reflect on your own needs. Because you are not excluded, you are not exempt, right? Having needs when you step into your classroom. Like what we heard earlier, right? Like our job's not easy, right? You come into a classroom, you have to like turn off a certain part of yourself, certain aspect of your life, just to be able to serve the 20-something or 30-something students in the classroom. Like look at the form, and this is not like, I'm not asking you to like fill it all up, but it's like, look at the form, look at some of the things that you might do, right? When you need to be alert, you need to be ready, you need to be focused when you're in the classroom. And see like, what are some of these things that, like apply to me? And then what are some of the things that apply to me, but may not apply to my students? Right? Because we go to the classroom, we have these needs, and we want our environment, and we want, the situation to align to what we think we need. But we have a room full of students having their individual needs. So something to think about, because I know all of us are like in auto mode, like in the morning, right? Oh, I have to go, get to school, be ready with my lessons, have all these things prepped up. But then what about you? So is there a way for us to like have a classroom that also caters to our needs? And then we all become productive. And then we can do what we need to do as teachers, right? So now we would like you to look at a video. So from ourselves, we now go to an example, just one of them, students who may have, sensory needs. This is a video that we want you to like take a look at. Like, this is a video of a kid with his mom stepping into the mall. I'd like you to take a look at how, everything is like coming into play in the perspective of the kid. This is the mall. Most of us go to the mall. Not all of us enjoy the mall, right? But we do go. And we do take kids who may not want to be in the mall, right? At the mall. So as we're bringing it up.
Six, 7, 8, 9. Take my hand. No, Alex. It's fine, isn't it? I'm not naughty. I'm autistic. And I just get too much information. Too much information.
Yeah. A quick share out. One thing that you notice and one thing that you're wondering about based on the video. So one thing I noticed was all of my senses were open. And I noticed that he was using counting techniques to calm himself down. And I'm wondering what other techniques he's been taught. That's a good segue, right? But that is right? When we go to the mall, well, I go to the mall, I have like a specific, I don't linger because of those things, right? But it's overwhelming, like especially for somebody who has, like that processing problem, right? Like I see all these things, I feel all these things, hear, even smell. Some of us don't even care, right? Like the rustling of, plastics, conversations, like all the sounds that you hear. But it's true. It could be overwhelming for somebody who's actually noticing every single aspect of the environment. It's not even about just himself, right? It's the environment. And then when you say, it's okay, is it okay? Right? So as we move on, we are going to be talking about some myths that are associated with sensory integration or sensory processing, as we call them, right, on the forms. So the first one being sensory integration therapy doesn't work. In literature, or since its inception, right, and historically, sensory integration therapy was meant for a specific population. So there are learning disabilities, ADD, ADHD, right? But now it's like widely used, right? Even for individuals who are non-diagnosed, right? Like all of us, we have sensory needs. But the therapy itself, when it's done in fidelity, according to the protocols, does work. But why doesn't it work in the educational environment? It's because it's so individualized and we cannot really have a room full of subjects, like 35 individuals who would be receiving the same protocol, the same treatment strategies, right? Because the sensory need itself is individualized. It does work, but it would work based on how the student is responding or how the individual is responding to the treatment, right? And how we're gathering data to know if it does. Okay. So this one, they will get used to it. What do you think is a great consequence when we just say, oh, they will just get used to it in the classroom? Let's say you have a student who has a lot of, oversensitivity, gets overstimulated, and they say, oh, it's okay. They get used to it.
Escalated behavior.
I'm sorry.
Escalated behavior.
Escalated behaviors. What else?
Continue to physically harm kids, right? If it's like sensory delight, things like that, creating headache or whatever.
And what happens when somebody is in that state? I'm being harmed. What do I do? There you go. Whew. This is easy. It is just a behavior. Oh, this I hear very often. Like sensory needs, sensory processing difficulties, it's just a behavior. I mean, I wish it worked so that all behavioral strategies actually would work, right? We find the antecedent, change that situation, and then we have a good response, right? But as we move along, you'll see it's more our neurological aspect that contributes to like the responses. We're gonna go deeper into that later. Oh, this one, the more, the better. As with any other intervention, right? Well, number one, if we are not exactly sure what is needed, and you put something that's too much, or that's something that's not needed, then obviously it might create more harm. And that's what we're here for. There are certain things that we might think in the classroom is good for all of our students, for everybody, but might not be. We cannot be like having them wear 25-pound vests, just because we think, right? Because we want to slow them down. Because all the rest of their, like they're running, they're bolting. If you don't have a rationale for doing things, it's more harmful than helpful, right? Only people with ASD have sensory processing disorders. Well, this we already know, right? I mean, there's a bountiful, like literature that even deals with sensory processing disorders or needs in individuals who are undiagnosed. Right? Even I have it. Not the diagnosis, but the sensory need. I was talking to Anne about migraines, and I said like migraines are like just pure sensory. And it's sad sometimes because I have to work in a classroom where I have all the triggers and I have to manage it afterwards, right? Like I work with students who, have more needs than I do, but then I have to work with them. So I end up like at home, like, oh, I'm nursing a migraine just because I was overstimulated to the sounds and the movement sometimes, right? And this is the energy level that you have to put in when you're working with students with special needs. Okay. All sensory activities are beneficial for all kids. I think we've already touched on this, right? Like without us knowing, like without observing, without getting information from the teacher, from the paraeducators, from the parents, we will not know the specific need, right? That's why it's not a one size fits all kind of thing. There may be things that we can do in the classroom that would benefit all students, but in terms of like specific sensory-based interventions, as an occupational therapist, I would say there's not a recipe for it. I would lose like, my job if there's actually a recipe for it, right? If you just like publish something like step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So earlier when we said what comes to mind when hear the word sensory, and a lot of us here put senses, right? Senses as the word that deals with sensory. So you learned about the 5 senses when you were at school, but we have more. So we have the vestibular sense right here. What is it for? That sensation of movement and balance, right? What about proprioceptive? Oh, this one is a favorite about this. Proprioceptive favorite. What is proprioceptive?
Jumping or your body.
Yeah, those are the activities that are like, right, jumping, anything that has to do with like the sensation that comes from our joints. Right, so as you can see, jumping is one of them, right? Oh, this one, the most important one that is usually not seen or even not communicated, interoception. What is that sense? Gives us a sense of what?
Feeling temperature.
When you're hungry, when you're tired, you need to go to the bathroom, you're thirsty, you're sleepy, right? And this is one of those things that you just say, oh, maybe it's because of something that happened at home. But then if they keep feeling it at school, there's a consequence to it, right? Like you'll see behaviors. Like if some of your students get tired, right? They get tired, they fall asleep, and then you say, oh, it's just like a student who needs more sensory input. I'm gonna drag this kid and jump on the trampoline, right? But if it's just like that sense of interoception that's bothering the kid, right?
Student right now, he has some swallowing issues and he's very thin, and he does aspirate. And he has, because he's fat, has all these issues, he has a hard time staying awake, so he's sliding under the table. He just wants to go to sleep, he's weak. And the classroom staff is going, that's a behavior, he's doing work avoidance. No, he's seriously having issues, let him go sleep. So, they let him sleep for an hour, he comes back, he's able to do a task. So sometimes that's what we need to do. And sometimes I think we get kind of caught up in our schedules, like they have to eat at a certain time, they have to go to the bathroom at a certain time, and we forget this whole interoceptive piece, right? Some kids aren't hungry at lunchtime, but we're making them eat at lunchtime, right? They may be hungry at 10 a.m. instead.
A lot of our students, right, like they do not express when, like, we work with students who have quote unquote more severe disabilities. So a lot of them are nonverbal or not able to express the need to go to the bathroom, or they may have constipation and can't say it, and then they just grab you because like, oh, for the love of God, take me to the bathroom, right? Or I have a tummy ache. But we never know. And we guess, right? And that's why it's important. Like it's very important for us to get data or ask our parent educators because they know. How many have seen the pyramid of learning? Okay, we have 2, 3 hands. What is it all about? So we talked about the senses, and as you can see, they're right in the bottom, right? All the senses. Interoception is not there. This is a 1996, but it still holds true, right? So it's kind of like similar. I don't know. Did anyone go to yesterday's? Watch the designing sensory friendly classroom. I think she did Maslow's, right?
Yes, she
It's
did.
kind of like similar, but this pyramid's you're dealing more of like the learning, like what is affected by when our sensory systems are out of whack, right? When one of them or most of them, the needs are not met, then the skills like on the top of the pyramid, they get affected. So again, if you're expecting our students to focus or to even be like, what's that, in a proper posture when they're sitting, right? Or motor planning is really tough. But yeah, like for them to actually like pay attention. But if their needs in the bottom, the sensory needs are not met, then kind of like follows all the way to the top. And then we test them, but we don't address their sensory needs. So what's going to happen, right? Okay. Does it work? Okay.
So there's different modes of sensory processing, right? And the most basic is looking at overactive and underactive sensory systems, right? So the best way to look at it, and we can talk a lot about students who are sensory seeking, sensory avoiding, who have low registration, who are sensory sensitive. Those are all categories under these two big overarching categories of sensory overactive and sensory underactive. So if you think of it as a bucket, right? Someone who has an overactive sensory system, it may take them a lot of water to fill that bucket and for them to get a response. So they need a lot of sensory information, right? As opposed to somebody who has an underreactive sensory system, you put a tiny bit of water in that bucket and you're going to get a response for that. And that's what makes it so challenging in the classroom, is because you can have a mixture of these types of students in the classroom. What also makes it challenging is you could have a child who is sensory seeking and tactile, but maybe sensory avoiding in visuals. Or you can have a child who is low registration auditorily, but they're sensory seeking in another mode, right? So it can be very, very complex, and you have to tease everything out to break it down. Okay, so this is the most frequent question we get asked as OTs. Is it behavior or is it sensory, right? And our feeling is, as OTs, unless you've gone all the way down the sensory rabbit hole, we don't want people calling it behavior. We would rather you look at sensory. Look at all the sensory stuff. Go all the way down and see, okay? If there's no sensory issues, then okay, let's talk behavior. But people who have sensory processing disorder have more anxiety, depression, mood disturbances, and it interferes with their ability to sustain social interactions, and it interferes with their ability to learn overall. So it's really important that we just don't label that right away. All right. And the reason why is the neurological reason behind this, right? And this is called the HPA axis. And how many of you are familiar with this? Oh, good. A couple of you. Great. Great. So basically, this is how your sympathetic nervous system works, right? So you perceive a threat, and your amygdala, which is a small structure inside your brain, sends a signal to your hypothalamus. And that sends a signal to your pituitary gland. And that sends a signal to your adrenals. And cortisol and adrenaline are released, right? And then based on that, you get a fight, flight, or freeze response, right? So bear walks into the room, this whole thing is going to take off, and either you're going to fight the bear, you're going to run from the bear, or you're going to play dead, right? Depending on how your HPA axis works. But there's this little guy over here called the prefrontal cortex right here, right? Very important in this system, right? What the prefrontal cortex does is it allows us to, it has higher level thinking, problem solving, emotional regulation. So another example, you see a spider. You're afraid of spiders, right? So your HPA axis might get triggered. But are you going to go running down the street for miles, screaming, yelling, throwing yourself at the street, kicking and screaming? Most likely not, right? Your prefrontal cortex is going to come in and go, okay, what are you going to do about the spider, right? Are you gonna find somebody else to take care of the spider for you in the house? Are you gonna get the vacuum and suck it up? Are you going to put it under a glass? That's the job of your prefrontal cortex. Now, we also know that the frontal lobe is not fully developed in young people until age 25, right? So these functions of the prefrontal cortex are not completely there, right? So as adults, we need to help our students come up with these problem solving. It's even more acutely a problem if you have damage, right? You have neurological challenges that impede your frontal lobe. This prefrontal cortex will not work. So imagine if you're going into a classroom and you view or you feel the noise level in there is threatening because it hurts your ears, and you're constantly engaging this HPA axis, right? So your vagus nerve, which is your rest and digest nerve, which allows you to calm down, never gets activated. So you're constantly in this fight, flight, or freeze mode. And that's what's happening with a lot of our students, right? And so sometimes we even see it even when they hit the doorway of the classroom, because they are anticipating, they're like, oh no, this is going to happen to me again, right? So it's important to understand that there's a lot of neurological basis in what's going on. Which brings us to trauma responsive sensory forms, occupational therapy care, and adverse childhood experiences. Okay, so Kaiser Permanente and the CDC, are you guys familiar with ACEs?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Kaiser Permanente did the study about ACEs and how childhood trauma impacts children and how it impacts them long term, right? And as a result, these kids who have a lot of adverse childhood experiences are more susceptible to disease, incarceration, addiction, and early death, depending on how many adverse childhood experiences they have. And this study has been replicated many, many times and with similar results. It's longitudinal studies. And if you're looking at the ACEs pyramid, I mean, it could start all the way down from historic trauma. And it was kind of a nice segue that we had Dr. Love before we came in here, because she's talking about generational historic trauma, right? You know, if your family was discriminated against, if a victim of genocide, a victim of war, they had to migrate, any of those historical traumas are impacting parenting patterns, which can impact the whole system even hundreds of years later, okay? There's also social conditions and local context, which again, we're talking about inadequate education systems, poor access to healthcare, living in food deserts, having unstable housing, right? These all can also affect your ACEs score. And then we talk about adverse childhood experiences for the individual. And the adverse childhood experiences are the abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, neglect, but it also can include incarceration of a family member, the mental illness of a parent, right? And now people are saying, and having adverse sensory experiences, right? Particularly when you go to the classroom, you have it happen to you every day. Not only in the classroom, but in the community, like the little boy who we saw on the film. Like going nowhere is safe, right? So you're going to feel unsafe. This impacts your social, emotional, and neurodevelopmental development, and causes people to develop high-risk behaviors such as smoking, drug abuse, risky behaviors, and exacerbates disease, disability, and social problems. And if you have a high enough ACE score, the chances are you will die early. The chances are if you have a high enough ACE score, you'll get cancer or diabetes or heart disease. So it's pretty serious. Okay, so what can trigger trauma, right? So these are some general things that can trigger trauma. When you think about all these things happen in the school, the sounds in the school bell, the sounds of the announcements made on the loudspeaker. I work in a school where the school secretary is constantly on the loudspeaker, making the most ridiculous announcements, right, Melissa? And it scares the entire place, right? Being too close to people, being in crowded hallways during passing periods. The thought of, oh my gosh, what's gonna happen today, the unpredictability of what might happen to me. Smells like the food in the cafeteria can actually make kids feel nauseous or sick, right? Or even the smells that of the chemicals that you use in cleaning products in the classroom, right? The smell from the silverware, all that. And going to certain places like the gymnasium can be triggering. The media, teachers use a lot of YouTube, and sometimes there's bright visuals and loud noises, that's triggering. And your feelings can also be triggering. And the situations like working in a group work, maybe you can't be around other people, it's too overwhelming, and you're being put in a large group to work. That could also cause trauma. So what can we do in a classroom? Here's the meat of what we can do. Good, we have 35 minutes. So 2 things, sensory-based interventions, which is the typical stuff you guys are seeing, right? And changing the environment. Now, what is a sensory-based intervention? It is a standalone intervention. It's something that you do to a child. It does not require the active participation of the child, but the child can participate if they so wish. Like, for example, putting a child at a sand and water table or giving them a fidget. It's an example of something that they can actively participate in. However, a lot of these don't work, and the evidence-based research shows they don't work. Okay, so the ones that do work, alternative seating, does help with focus and attention in various ways, but it's not the cure-all. You don't put everybody in a ball chair in the classroom. You can't do that. Jen had a teacher who she wanted to get every student in the classroom in a ball chair because they weren't focusing. And when she went to the classroom, it turned out it was because the band was practicing across the way. Okay, that's the problem right there. Not that the kids need the ball chair, right? Chewing, jewelry, the chewing tools. Yes and no, it depends on what the student needs it for, right? Some students, that proprioceptive input will help with attention and focus, but we do get those students who like to mouth everything. They put everything in their mouth, right? That's different. That's a student who is stuck in a developmental phase. They're stuck in that developmental phase of, oh, what's this? I can put in my mouth and figure out what it is, right? You give them the chewy and they put it in their mouth and like, oh, I know what that is. I don't care. To take that back out. I want to know what this thing is and put it in my mouth. 2 separate things. So sometimes I hear that from teachers, oh, the chewy doesn't work. It's like, yes, because that's not the purpose for this child. Sensory diets and sensory activity schedules. Sensory diets are for the specific child. They're tailored to a child. A sensory activity schedule, it is for the entire classroom to be done before like a fine motor activity or an activity that requires a lot of concentration. There is good evidence that both of these work. However, a word of caution on sensory diets, because I've got IEPs that say the sensory diet must be done every 20 minutes, right? Well, you do a sensory diet when the child is there, right? And 20 minutes in, they could be focusing and performing well. You don't want to pull them, go to sensory diet time, right? Nor do you want to have somebody falling apart after 5 minutes and saying, oh no, got another 15 minutes till your sensory diet, okay? So you have to really know your student. Brushing, no evidence base that this works, no evidence base that it ever worked. Some students enjoy it, but long term, there's no sensory benefit to it. Weighted vests. Weighted vests, there is no sensory evidence-based research that say they work. They don't work. The same with compression vests. I am often asked to get a weighted vest for a student who is eloper. And I want to slow them down. And all you're going to do is get a very strong eloper because that's not a trusting issue, right? And it's also a form of restraint when you think about it. It's like, I'm just gonna rocks in their pocket and hope they don't get away. All right? Fidgets, yes. fidgets in the right context, where you're using the fidgets. Hopefully you're paying better attention to me because you've made a bunch of little cubes. But I've seen fidgets given out as rewards. Do your work and you get your fidget. Right? That's different. That's not sensory. That's a behavior. Okay. Noise canceling headphones. Anecdotally, we know these work, right? There's not a lot of evidence-based research on it, but we know they work. But the problem is a lot of the ones that we get to order for school are pretty quality and they're not comfortable, right? So if you get a parent who's willing to invest in some nice noise canceling headphones with the padded headband, those are most effective. Also, if you have a student who's tactily defensive and you put that over their ears, that's not going to work. One little story, I went into a classroom and the student was doing the general plug his ears, right? And I'm like, okay, he can't tolerate this noise, right? And the teacher's like, gave me he's got to get used to it. And I was like, oh no. So she goes, well, watch. And she put on another YouTube video and he took his fingers out of his ears. And then she put on another one and he put his fingers back in his ears. And I said, okay, so there's something about the pitch and the visuals and the loudness of those other two videos that bother him, right? So either we put on noise canceling headphones when you show those other two, or you change up your morning meeting slide deck, right? One or the other. So we talked about the vagus nerve, right? We want the vagus nerve to be in a good state. We want kids to be in rest and digest mode while they're working, right? So they can be at their best, not in fight, flight, or freeze mode. So these are 10 activities that you could do in the classroom that would stimulate the vagus nerve. And the first one, bilateral games, either touching opposite knees or clapping. I always see teachers do that, clap, 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 and everybody's like, oh, okay. Deep breathing, you could do that after recess because they're all hyped up. Or you could do that before a test. Rocking, if you have a quiet corner where you can have a small rocking chair and they can rock. They're not meant to rock there all day. They'll get overstimulated, but enough to calm them down, right? Touching soft textures in a quiet corner, or even allowing them to have something like that at their desk. Singing, humming, chanting, all really good to stimulate the vagus nerve. Unfortunately, a lot of school music programs are kind of falling away. Especially choir, which is sad. Creative activities. So during class downtime, putting out a variety of arts and crafts materials, paints, glue, any types of crafts, and allow those kids to engage in those creative activities, even puzzles. Oftentimes what I see in classrooms is it's free choice time and here's a tablet, or it's free choice time and here's a computer, right? And those are not going to calm your student down. I mean, they will, because a lot of kids are addicted to the technology, let's face it. But giving them another outlet to calm their vagus nerve is much better, as opposed to something that they have an addiction to. And there's a whole lot of research about screen addiction, what it does to young minds. Swinging. A lot of schools have taken out swings from the playground. Johnny fell off and got hurt and they sued. But if you can, and if your administrators will, which is really tough, a swing in a classroom or in a quiet corner, that's good. Cold water. Having access to cold towels or cold water bottle, being able to splash your face with cold water when you're getting overwhelmed or overstimulated helps you calm down the vagus nerve. There's a lot of people who do ice baths. I don't know if you've seen those on Instagram or YouTube. People are ice baths for their vagus nerve. Nature walks.
Hello?
Going out and just walking in nature. I know campuses don't generally have a lot of nature, but if there is some places on your campus where there's trees and being able to go out and just interact with the nature. That's also a good time for high schoolers and middle schoolers when they do all those announcements that sent your kids through the roof. Then maybe it's just, let's go for a morning walk. And last, walking barefoot. We have lots of kids who take their shoes off, right? And we always say, oh, no, it's defensive, right? But then they're touching everything. They're like, they're not tactile defensive. What they're looking for is a connection to the ground. lots of good information about a connection with Brent. Okay. All right. So what I want to say right now is all those sensory-based interventions that I showed you are a $1.8 billion business in 2020. $1.8 billion of stuff that doesn't always work, right? So it's very tempting to go out and get the sensory hallway. Sometimes the administrators go out and put in this big sensory hallway, and then it's like, oh, that's horrible. Yeah, that's really not what's needed. It can be simple. Just keep it simple, right? And if you want to take away 4 things from what I'm going to say, and that is, these are 4 inexpensive sensory changes that you can make in your classroom that don't require much. First one is, if your classroom has access to natural light, use it. I know that's hard sometimes in the winter. I know sometimes it's hard depending on the position of the sun during the day, but if you can use the natural light, use it. Keep your noise levels down, right? I go into classrooms, a lot of teachers use those YouTube videos and they are blaring and it's too loud for me. I mean, I have sensory sensitivity for hearing, right? I'm in classrooms where the staff are yelling instructions across the room to like one parent educator to another. Don't yell in the classroom, no shouting, stop. Cover up or put away materials. So if you have I know OTs and teachers are the same, right? We collect stuff because people never get it again, right? You might need this next year, right? I get it, but put it in cabinets if you can, or go to the Goodwill and get some neutral colored sheets or blankets or something, tablecloth, and cover those things up because the visual clutter is really hard. And last thing, take as many items off the walls as you possibly can. I come into a room, the instructional space is here, there's the alphabet, there's a bunch of artwork, there's the classroom rules, there's a map, there's all this visual distraction. If you could put that behind the kids, and I know that teachers and administrators, they like to see lots of decoration in the room, right? But if you can pare it down and maybe behind students. Okay. All righty. Okay, you have papers on your tables. So if you are alone, yes, I would suggest, join another table just for this activity. Because we would like for you to look at a single photo, so you don't get overwhelmed, right? One photo, and then look at the features of the space, right? And see how these may or may not work in addressing the sensory needs of, think about a student or two that you have in a classroom. So that's the first thing that we need to do. Look at the space, see the features, things that may or may not work. And then you get to share one feature within your group of that space that you like or do not like. And of course, you have to, emphasize on how and why you think this benefits or does not benefit your student. No. Yes. So, and then the last one would be, I'll just like a big group share out, but I would like you, for you to kind of like look at the picture and pick out a feature or two.
And they still can't see your, I thought some did this, they can't see your slides, okay? And they What was your QR code to?
It was just to the slides.
Okay, is there, I don't know how to put that on here.
Is there a way to turn down the buddy?
I can try. The QR
I'm sorry to call you out. I shouldn't have called you out, but.
Kathy? Right, like I agree. That's what I get. Like where is it? I really want to know where. So that if you're like if you're yeah. But then like I that that's like exactly, like everything is so right. And some places still yeah. So we got less than a minute. And then we'll do a big group share out so we can get to the rest of the slides because there's still a lot more. I'm so sorry. I think
Okay, for those who have group one picture, let's start with what you think is worth, what is beneficial. What is beneficial first to your students in this picture?
So
So our group thought that the tennis balls were beneficial and kind of keeps.
all the
the
beliefs
noise in the
and things like
classroom
that they've been putting up, that could be interpreted.
What else was raising your hand? I thought something else. Oh, Elisa.
Well, the looks like the light box or the box light screen is covered with a
Sorry.
cloth.
So they passed out these slides.
Good.
They didn't pass anything out, no.
Anything else? What do you think of the lighting?
Well, the blinds
They
are
put the
closed, so
QR
no
code up
natural
there.
light. And everybody has the same chair, so no like differential seating.
And that might not work for certain students, right, in a classroom with more unique sensory needs. Although it's nice that the blinds can be open, close, right, depending on the visual sensitivity or visual needs, sensory needs of your students, you can adjust it. So adjustable is always good rather than fixed. We can move on to the next one. Oh, what is not beneficial? Sorry, because before we move on to it. Like, what do you think is not working in that, aside from this flexible seating, like all the chairs are the same?
Maybe just the lack of natural light.
Mm-hmm. Oh. Those hard floors are not helping anybody. You need some carpets on that floor or some rugs. Good one. What about if you have students who are constantly fidgeting? What could be a potential
It's inside of their desk.
desks, right? I mean, I know it's for practicality's sake, like everything's just there, but there are students who cannot handle that everything's there. Right? So there could be alternatives depending on the student's needs, right? I know for like most kids were saying, oh, everything's there, everything's good, right? But if there are students who are like first unable to like organize, right? Or unable to attend and focus, if everything is just there, then everything is just there, right? So it's gonna be harder for you to kind of like, yeah, and the visual clutter, if you have students who are actually paying attention to everything that's in front of them, I mean, it's good that one part of the front is like blocked, covered, but there's still a lot of things that could be like, depending again on the needs of the. Okay. What about this space? What works?
We got natural light, the windows, the frame, reminds me very much of the TK room that I'm the hero right now in. We have natural light there too, section of areas. That's a positive, because then you can focus on one small group and the small group can focus on that small space. The walls are not too crazy cluttered, like, and then two, maybe not so beneficial that we noticed, was. Oh, the, cozy seating. There's no other alternative to, seating. And then, oh, and the shelves are open, they are not covered, especially for this, it seems like a small age group. For them, that would be like, yay.
So it's good, that, the group notice, like, what is this classroom for, or for, for which age or grade level, right? Because it will vary depending on like the grade level and their current needs, right? So all the time, that shelf in the back is noticed as like, for little kids, it's free for all, right? So in the same way, like if you have kids who are just like, ooh, right? Like it's like a toy store, like no control. You just go straight to that area, even if you have partitions. That's it, right? Okay, we move on to the third one. But this, who had,
It's a big class.
So we talked about the natural light from that window as a benefit. But we also discussed the clutter, like even with the natural light and all of those supplies in the back corner, there's a lot of visual clutter that could benefit from the cabinet or something. We also noticed there was no adaptive seating. So it's all just those chairs on a linoleum floor. It'll be pretty loud. But we did see a lot of creative activity. So all the art and everything, so that could be really beneficial for some kids. Okay.
oh, what about this one? Okay.
So we've seen, this one probably has the most natural light, if you look at the big windows over there and the windows up top. Also, the high ceilings give just in general, give you a sense of more space in the way the walls are painted. Also, there are defined, I couldn't see on the smaller picture, but there's some defined areas on the left-hand side of the corner is actually a calm down corner, it looks like, with some tools and sensory items, which is nice. The reading area is right in front of us here. And then I was looking for visuals or icons, and there are some on the far right by the colored art. There's like some things, it might be a daily schedule or something. The next thing we noticed too is there's like a play area over by the window to the right, so there are defined areas. This does appear to be, we talked about maybe a TK or K classroom. With the seating, it was an interesting arrangement within a circle. We were talking about like it could probably work for a story time or some kind of group activity, but we weren't sure if there was stations. Generally, there's stations that rotate through TK and K, where students are working either independently or they're working with a teacher or an IA teacher assistant. But an interesting looking for sure. And then sensory wise with the chairs, there appears to be like maybe a few student blankets or things that are comfy for them, but not necessarily alternative seating for them. But yeah, interesting looking class. Oh, and the structure on top. With the trees, I don't know, is that could be a safety hazard? It's beautiful, and maybe the kids made it with teacher, but for me, how tightly wound, safety first always, and it looks nice, but how secure is that thing? Because it could fall, looks like these little ones.
Okay, last one. What about this?
So in terms of the good things about it, we like that there was natural light. Everything seems to have a place, even though there's open covered, it seems to be empty. We like that there was a rug, but we also felt at the same time the rug was kind of busy, and that there's a lot of colors happening. So that could be overstimulating, and then it was neat and clean, very tidy. Everything has a home. So that's what we.
Okay. Now, let's see. Are our observations part of the evidence-based tool? And we have 10 minutes to do that. Thanks. There you go. So a lot of the observations and what you thought were beneficial are all on this line. Like a lot of you identified zoning, like specific areas, right? in the room that corresponds to a specific activity during the day, right? Floor differentiation, the rug or the rug versus the regular floor, or in some other schools, they have like, like colored circles, like as to where the students have to sit when they have circle time or group time. And then in that one picture that has like, kind of like stations, right? So there's like a way to circulate, like the students are allowed to circulate, and there's a possibility of choosing, like when you have that free choice time, right? Where you go, or even instructional time. I've seen some teachers who have like rotations, like different tables having different activities, but all are corresponding to a curricular activity, but the students get to pick which ones to do first. So they have that space to move around. And of course, we know proportion and proxemics, like you're not gonna put, one who's undersensitive and an oversensitive kid together, right? So make sure that there's enough space in between, right? And that strategic, intentional placement, like, oh, this kid should not be with this kid, just because I want them both to focus, right? And then like grouping, like where do I put like certain things in my room so that they work for, let's say, art, or they work for math or science, or like a little maker space within your classroom, right? And then dividers, like I know we don't have a lot of space in most of our classrooms, but if we are like able to strategically divide the rooms so that our students are aware like what's happening in each of these spaces, that helps in focusing, okay? And the lights. So there's a study, it's kind of like the PG&E of another state. They did a study on like the type of lights that actually work for students' attention. And they're the ones that are dimmable LEDs. I mean, I have, like in my high school classes, they have those, which works, right? Because a lot of our students in high schools, it's like maybe half of this room is their classroom. So if there's anything that we can adjust, right, it's good for them. So anything that's dimmable, adjustable, and if you don't have those adjustable lights, the dimmer covers, although in some of the districts, they do not allow it because they're fire hazards. I remember installing one set in my middle school, and then I came back and said, what happened? So there, you do something, but then there are certain things that we have to follow, like fire department codes. So natural lighting, we said that, and the glare, like those dimmers also work as to reduce glare, because if you have light like this, right, there's glare on the screen. Like if we're using a lot of the shiny floors, laminated stuff, and then you have like lights that actually a lot of glare. So there you go. And then for the visuals, the last one, we said it's neat, right? Like it's like there's a clear layout. You can actually see like where things are and what they're for. And then the visual supports, like a lot of our students need that, but it has to be strategic. Like if you want them to say, I want to go to the bathroom, where should that be? Should that be behind the, like the blackboard or on the whiteboard, or should it be like closer to the door? Because if they're already going there, like, I would use that, right? It's more strategic. And then, again, we said decreasing the visual noise and the clutter organization is sometimes a problem when we are in our classrooms, because we want a lot of things going, right? And everything has to be there, and we don't have enough storage space, so everything's just there, right? And then signage for wayfinding. I think I have like I had a classroom before, like for preschoolers, like they just know like where to go, like this is the way to the bathroom, this is the way to the circle, like the circle time area. So that helps in organizing, like especially if it's helping with the predictability of the space. A lot of our students actually like that. Like if they have sensory needs, when make it more predictable, it's better for them because they don't have to get overwhelmed. And then you saw the picture with the cloth covering the back of where you're standing as a teacher, right? So the clearer or the neater your background is, the better, so that the attention is on you, right? And then neutrals. It's the last group, no, the second to the last group mentioned something about the rug, right? So in some classrooms, like if we're trying to teach colors, primary colors, those things work, right? But if we have students who are like overly stimulated, overly sensitive, neutrals are still best. And then I know in visual, like students with visual impairments, we need contrast. But in general, if we can minimize like the stark contrast of like the overly bright colors, in some areas of the classroom that might attract the visually sensitive kid or the visually seeking kid, if it's better for us to use like more neutral colors that contrast. And then I cannot stress the importance of visual supports. I know many of us have already been using this, right? Like visual schedules, the first, then, anything that creates the structure and the predictability and the consistency would help our students with sensory needs adjust or adapt to the environment. And then auditory. So there's a lot of research on using sound absorbing walls. I know Amazon has them, but I don't know about the fire code. But if you have a little area where you actually like allow kids, right? Like a little area in the classroom and you want to dampen the noise, you could actually, make, those trifolders, presentation boards. You can even put those, sound absorbing, walls, panels on them. They're like tiles. And then that actually dampens the noise. Yeah, so, and then headphones we already know about. And then I want to stress priming. If you're going to have a fire drill or anything that's going to be, announced over the PA system, prime your students. If you must have a social story for it, if you must have a visual that says, at this time we're going to have this, then please do so. Because priming helps with, again, preparing themselves for the trigger. And you cannot prevent the trigger from happening because there's a fire drill, right? Okay, and of course, it's not easy to avoid the noisy setting. That's why we put headphones on. But if you can actually, in your classrooms, decrease the level of noise that triggers, a sensory response, then do so. There are some students who respond well to white noise. I mean, I have a student who's wearing a Bluetooth, wireless headphone that has just like the white noise being played the entire day. Because this kid has, a more extensive auditory issue.
It's probably brought to that. It's soft, sort of. Maybe.
Yeah, like a spa thing, yeah. No, but there are certain kids who are like very sensitive to like pitch. So it's hard. I mean, you have to work with your occupational therapist if you were actually like trying to figure it out. We figured out the white noise after so many different headphones. It just so happens that the white noise was the one that actually like,
Don't hurt them.
I mean, it's not 100%, like effective, but it's,
Helps me relax.
yes.
I have a question. About the noise, I know that a lot of general ed teachers have in their quiet working time. We still have we have some inclusion, but we still have also extra, separated classes. But if we send some of our kids to inclusion format or something like that, and the teacher always has like that subtle music that we were talking about, this meditative music. Trumps them, the kid that is coming into the class for one class, or the teacher that usually has that always going. And it's successful for the kid.
Well, that's the thing. There are certain things that work for, let's just say, the 20-something students. And then there's 5 who cannot tolerate what is, like almost like a tier 1 intervention, right? Like for calming music, right? But then there's like 5. So this is where you individualize.
Would that be case for 5 who don't like it, would get like noise canceling headphones?
It could be if they tolerate it. If it's functioning, if it's helping them function, it's again about function, right? I mean, if taking that music out will not affect, the whole class, right? I'm thinking there's no harm in just letting the teacher know that, we have a couple of kids who are this sensitive. Because I think Yes, but if you just, like more like the rationale for it, right? Like sensitivity versus just like a calming space that kids can be, other kids can adapt. If they can adapt and they can function in the same way with or without music, then I would suggest like, yeah, so. But then the last one would be the headphones, but that's more invasive than turning the music off. I know we ran out of time. Any other questions? I mean, all the rest of our are on the slides, and if you have questions, because these were like all from journal articles, they're not, I mean, they're intuitive solutions, but sometimes you do not remember, like, oh, it's just this, right? I have to do because I have this set of students. You can email us, you have our emails. Any other questions? One more. And then.
No, it's not that. So how do you know which sensitive are, like, which, how do you know, is it just trial and error? It's like, which one, how do you know?
So if you're working with an occupational therapist, we have a full on assessment, batteries of tests, assessments that require a lot of observations, information from the teacher and whoever's working with the students. And then we identify, based on the results of that test, we identify like which areas are more effective versus, standardized. Yeah, and there's standardized assessments. I mean, we wanted to put that on here, but it's just like, maybe next year. Which is collaborative, but yeah, there's a whole battery of assessments and that helps us determine like the needs. And the recommendations are based on the results of this. That's why work closely with your OTs. Well, thank you so much.